My name is Erica Albertson, and I'm the president of Iowa State Model United Nations, which is a club here on campus. And if anyone is interested in going further into depth with the conversation between Ms. Sorensen and the rest of the group, there is going to be a fundraising dinner tonight at 7:30. Well, it starts at 6:30, but dinner's at 7 at the Basil, which is of West Lincoln Way, and the cost is $20. And Ms. Sorensen will be speaking there, and there will be a dinner and a silent auction and a chance for everyone to talk. So if you're interested in that, you'll have plenty of time to get there after the speech tonight. If everyone could maybe move forward so that we're all sort of in a central location, that would be nice, so that everyone's not so spread out. That would be great. Our speaker tonight is Ms. Jillian Sorensen, and she's a senior advisor to the United Nations Foundation. She has previously served as the Assistant Secretary General for External Relations on appointment by Secretary General Kofi Annan. As a member of the Secretary General's Inner Circle, she had a role in his communication strategy as well as schedule planning. She was also the contact point for certain host city matters. Prior to that assignment, Mrs. Sorensen served for 4 years, from 1993 until 1996, as the Special Advisor for Public Policy to Secretary General Boutros Ghali. Her duties there included directing the UN's worldwide 15th anniversary observances in 1995. We are very lucky and excited to have her here, so please join me in welcoming Ms. Jillian Sorensen.
Well, thank you, Erica, and good afternoon, everybody. It is great to be in Iowa. I've never been here before. So my husband comes from Nebraska. I feel as though I'm nearby there, and very happy to be here indeed, and to bring a UN message, a UN story out to all of you, and hopefully to take your questions and comments, and after my remarks to have some good discussion and dialogue on all of these issues. I'm coming out at what anybody might call a challenging time for the United Nations. For the UN and its supporters, it is a time where we are somewhat on the defensive, and yet there is much to say, and there is in fact good news. But as we all know, good news doesn't make news. So I will take a few minutes to mention some of those things before we go into the more difficult and problematic issues. Today also is a moment to be talking about the United Nations because of the hearings going on about terrorism. And I wonder if any of us need any more prodding than that to remind us that we are connected to the world at large. We are not protected. We are not simply safe because we're a huge country with enormous oceans on either side. We are part of the world in every sense, and we are therefore required to consider that the problems that affect the rest of the world are ours as well. As the Secretary General has sometimes said, these are global problems that require global responses. The debate that is going on today about terrorism, and in a larger sense in Washington about America and the world, and in Congress and between the State Department and the Pentagon about America and the world, is a very important and fundamental question about how is this country going to see the rest of the world, relate to them, work with, deal with them, and on the reverse of that question, to understand better how we are perceived and understood, or possibly misunderstood, by the rest of the world. The day is long gone when we can simply think that because we're Americans, it doesn't matter. All of that is too far away. I would suggest that it matters a lot, and that we do have a stake in what the United Nations is doing because it has an effect on us in many, many ways. To understand the UN, yes, sir.
How long have you been talking?
I'm sorry?
How long have you been talking?
Just about 3 minutes?
Yeah, because we were wondering whether it was the right time, because you came before 5:30.
I'm sorry. Well, my leader, my presenter started. I'm sorry if we missed, but you only missed a few words. Okay. To think about the UN requires a certain world view. And that world view is basically that we are all connected, that we have the opportunity to use the forum of the UN as a place to join forces, to build alliances, to find a common cause, and to work on issues that cross borders without passports. It's easy to think of those. Terrorism, of course, I referred to that. But what about the traffic in drugs and arms? What about health issues like AIDS or SARS? What about environmental issues, the clean air and the water that we drink? What about the numbers of other problems that are created when there's trouble in one country or one region that spills over into other countries? That too crosses borders without passports. I am reminded, when I think of this, of a comment by Madeleine Albright, our former Secretary of State, who said, even superpowers need friends. Even superpowers need friends. And where are we going to find those friends? Where are we going to build those alliances? Where else but in the only international forum, which is the United Nations? There we can work with others, we can build those coalitions, we can develop our own policies in a way we hope that is consistent and coherent and understood by others. We can, in that old phrase, win friends and influence people. But to do that, we have to be ready to listen with respect to others. We have to hear what they're saying. We have to do so with some measure of respect for their sovereign status and their national interests, as well as our own. This cannot be done if we are thinking only of America first. And if America ignores this opportunity or abdicates its leadership role in the UN, I believe we become a diminished nation, permanently reduced in stature. Well, I know there are lots of critics of that point of view, but let's think about it as I talk a bit further. There are plenty of criticisms, we hear them all, and some of them have merit, but the UN today, thanks especially to the leadership of Kofi Annan, is reformed, as they used to say. It is downsized, it is leaner than ever. It has had a zero growth budget for more than 5 years. It has, I'm glad to say, the extraordinary leadership of Kofi Annan, for whom I worked these last 7 years, who is the first UN Secretary General ever selected from inside the organization. He was a career professional, and it was a turn of fate, unexpected fate, that brought the leadership to him when Secretary General Boutros-Ghali did not succeed, for a variety of reasons, in having a second term. They looked, they cast their eyes, they were looking for another African, and to many people's surprise, they chose an inside UN professional, Kofi Annan from Ghana. He is now in the 7th year of his term. I'll just say a word about him because he's such an exceptional human being. He grew up in Ghana. He was the first African exchange student to come to a small college in Minnesota called Macalester College. Many of you heard of Macalester? I think it's a Presbyterian college. And for reasons which I don't fully understand, it has flown the UN flag for more than 50 years. It's a small liberal arts college with a basic worldview, as I have described, teaching its students that even in the heart of the Middle West, no, here is the heart of the Middle West. They call themselves Middle West, though. Here in Minnesota, they are connected to the world at large, and that their students have an opportunity to do something in the world at large. And Kofi Annan is the first to say that that experience, leaving his home village, where his own parents were leaders and his mother was a businesswoman and so on. It was an educated family, but taking the great leap, crossing the ocean, going to a Minnesota winter of all things, which was a shock. He talks about wearing earmuffs for the first time. But all of that really opened his eyes, as international study always does, to a larger world. He got another degree at Sloan, MIT, in management. He then studied in Geneva, and he then joined the UN as a junior professional working in refugee assistance. He speaks French and English, of course, and several African languages. And in fact, when he was chosen, there were some critics who said it would be a disadvantage. He knew too much, he would somehow be compromised. But it turned out to be an enormous advantage, because from day one he could take off like that. He knew the UN like the palm of his hand. He knew the limits and the possibilities. He knew the reality of the UN, the necessity for compromise. And he was, for not just compromise, but consensus. And he was, in the most remarkable way, a builder of consensus and somebody who inspired trust and confidence, even from people who disagreed with him. By nature, he's a quiet person, very contained. But having watched him work at close hand these 7 years, there is almost, I see it as in a physical place, it's right there. There is a core of confidence and calm, even in the midst of many difficulties and pressures, that allows him to lead and to inspire and to move the organization forward as no one else has ever done. And the Nobel Peace Prize Committee recognized this when they honored him 2 years ago. In any case, I digress, but we are lucky to have him as a leader now. He has just 3 more years to his, that would make 10 years of service, and that will be the end of his leadership. And it will be interesting to see who is the next SG, as we call him, Secretary General. By tradition, it would be an Asian, if the Asians can come together and come behind a single choice. If that happens, then that would be probably what would be the next leader. Kofi Annan understood also what reform meant and how to do it, how you could economize, how you could consolidate functions, how you could communicate in a much more open way, how, I won't say you could, how he could establish a classic cabinet-style leadership, bringing together all the heads of departments and making sure that the coordination among them was open and frequent. And he did just that within weeks of his taking office. Excuse me. But he did something else that was very important. In his first words to the assembled staff of the United Nations, he said, "We are in this together. I cannot possibly succeed alone." And those were the most empowering words that people could have heard. It had been a difficult couple of years under the leadership of Boutros Ghali, and Kofi Annan had an ability to inspire, to encourage, and mobilize the team in a very important way. So with that leadership, and with his focusing on what had to be done, the UN has moved ahead. Now, when you read the newspaper, you would imagine that all UN does is peacekeeping. But let me put that in context and remind you, I know many of you know this, of course, but remind that peacekeeping is only 20% of the UN agenda. And within the peacekeeping agenda itself is not just Afghanistan and Iraq, but 13 other peacekeeping operations. There are some going on in the border of India and Pakistan, in Cyprus, in Congo, in Liberia, in East Timor, in Kosovo, and other places as well. So the peacekeeping and peace and security, as they call it, is a very important function. It is the most controversial and difficult, and the one that makes the most news. But you must understand that nothing in this area comes to UN when it's easy. Excuse me. If it were easy, it would have been solved at home or in the region without ever coming to United Nations. So when you consider the UN, think of the peacekeeping function, which is very challenging, but which does often succeed. And then remember the larger areas around the world where UN is at work. And move your scope then along to think of UN's work in development. That is to say, not just creating clean water and such, but developing around the world free and democratic governments, supporting the creation and growth and support of democracy, setting up free and fair elections, monitoring and assisting those elections, and making sure that there's not only one democratic election, but a series. There are more than 45 countries that have asked for electoral assistance. Iraq among them. It's coming soon. And the UN has deep expertise in that important area of the development of free and fair elections and democratic governments. And then think of UN's work in disarmament, meaning not just nuclear arms, but chemical and biological weapons, small arms, the enormous traffic in small arms, and other kinds of weapons. The UN has a unique opportunity because it is universal. Everyone is there to help in ways legal, financial, and diplomatic to control the proliferation and the traffic in arms and hold governments to account. I might add that this country, among many others, is one of those traffickers and manufacturers of arms. That's another subject that we could come back to if you want. But then think of UN's work in human rights. Human rights was part of the Charter, and Eleanor Roosevelt played a key role in establishing that. And it means not just human rights in trying to state the goal, but now to bring it up to date, to make sure that it includes people from the North and the South, that is the north of the equator and south of the equator, rich and poor, women and men, even children, the rights of human beings, which are, as they always say, universal and indivisible. The words in the Charter on that, and in the Human Rights Covenant itself, are very powerful. You can read them in 10 minutes. And the work of the Human Rights Commission is often literally life and death work. It's easy for us to take it for granted. But in other countries, if you have the temerity to speak up about politics, for heaven's sakes, or to criticize your leader, your own liberty may be gone. Or if you choose to gather with a group of 10 or 20 to discuss something, that may be against the law, and your right to assemble may be taken. Or if you choose to meet to worship, that right too may be taken away from you. I've had opportunities to go with the Secretary General, and this was the most powerful experience I've ever had, to the center, and there are a number in this country, for the victims of torture in Minnesota. And it was in a building, looked like a Victorian house on a residential street. But there in that house were some 25 or so who had, through efforts of UN, escaped their tormentors and their torturers, and had come to this haven for both psychological and physical rehabilitation. And when the Secretary General was there, he spent several hours with them, mostly to hear their stories. And in turn, 4 of them spoke and told what it was like to lose their freedom, to be imprisoned unjustly, or to be charged with no ability to respond, or in some cases no way to know what the charge against them was. In some cases they were physically tortured. In some cases it was isolation. It was enough to make you weep, and they would talk in very quiet voices, and there would be long pauses, and they would look at the ceiling or look out the window and then continue their story. But none of them were able to finish, because men and women, both, they all ended up in tears. And they could have been describing something that had happened yesterday, not the year before or 3 years before. It was so vivid in their mind. This is the kind of human rights work that the United Nations does, not only setting norms and standards, but going to the source, helping to free the imprisoned and holding governments to account for what they do in this area. And then consider UN's work in humanitarian and refugee relief. This year alone, UN is looking after 20 million refugees who have no shelter, no safety, no food, no way to go home in safety. And so UN is out there on the front lines at high risk, giving protection to them until the time comes when the political situations have changed and they can return. And there too are people are not soldiers, they are refugee workers. And one of them told me an amazing story. One of the camera companies, I think it was Kodak, made a gift to UN of digital cameras, small digital cameras. And that allowed us to take the great leap forward of being able, with children who are separated from parents in the chaos of refugee movements, to take pictures of them quickly and to send those pictures forward to the next camp. So that instead of it being weeks or months or years even of separation, with these little children then, losing memory of their parents, it gave us the capacity to reunite them quickly. And that simple ability has solved a problem that was very, very difficult and distressing. The refugee workers are an amazing lot. They're people like you. A lot of them have had other professions. They come in through UN training. They are sometimes trained by non-governmental organizations like Amnesty International or Refugees International or CARE or Save the Children. They then go through special UN training, and UN serves as the umbrella organization to coordinate this work, which is very difficult and challenging, and in most cases life-changing for those who do it. Let me move on quickly just to mention environmental action. Think of the air we breathe in common, and the water, and sustainability, and climate change. I don't know if you all have expertise in this. I'm not an expert on this subject. But how else are we going to solve that unless we join forces with the rest of the world? So that's another key area. And then, and finally, come to reproductive health, family planning. To have safe birth, again, is something that we Americans take for granted. But in at least half the world, they say to be pregnant is to have one foot in the grave. Childbirth can be a cause of dread and terror. And infant mortality and maternal mortality are a reality in so many places that the ability of UN first to provide safe birth kits, training for midwives, and then family planning supplies so that women can space their children and protect themselves from AIDS is very, very important and needed and requested. UN never goes where it's not asked, but this is something that I'm sure you can see is much requested and needed. Secretary General has put a spotlight on the issue of AIDS. We almost forget that, say, 15 years ago, we never really spoke about it in public. I remember the first day I saw the word condoms on the front of the New York Times. I was taken aback. I remarked to my husband, I thought, well, we've crossed a threshold here. But we know now that AIDS is an epidemic, a pandemic, as such as we've never seen on Earth. And that it is moving in some parts of the world with lightning speed, not just in Africa, but in Asia, and parts of Asia and Central Europe. And it is something that we ignore at our peril. Secretary General convened the first World Conference on AIDS that in effect required heads of government who wouldn't say the word to come and speak about this issue frankly, acknowledge it in their own countries, and hear from the experts about the causes and the consequences of this virus and what had to be done and done fast if the epidemic was to be checked. Now, much progress has been made in the understanding of all of that, but leaders and medical professionals and citizens at large still have a long way to go to put a stop or put an end to this epidemic. Well, there are a few myths and misperceptions, I call it, if I can say the word, myths, that I would quickly like to demolish for you, because as I travel around the country, which I'm doing a lot these days, I find that I'm practically the only voice out here defending or supporting the UN. I hear a lot from the hard right, and I can tell you honestly that there are career UN bashers out there. There are demagogic bombastic nationalists who would just as soon destroy the UN. And yet when I listen to what they say and read what's on their internet, I can tell you they don't know what they're talking about. And that's one reason I'm here and traveling, and a few of my colleagues are doing the same. One of their myths is that the costs are a terrible burden that we can't possibly afford. Well, I would suggest that it's a dollar well spent. It is the best possible way to share the risk, the cost, the responsibility, the burden, and the benefits of joint action. The dues for each of us, for you and me both, are less than the cost of a bus ride in New York. It costs us each about $1.75 a year. Now, when you think that we're spending $400 billion and up on defense, don't you think that's something we can afford? And the employees of the UN altogether are 1/8 the employees of the municipal government of New York. And New York's responsibility is local. UN's, of course, is global. Another myth that I hear from the hard right is that the UN is dragging us into conflicts where we have no interest. Well, remember, the US is on the Security Council. We have the right of veto, that no peacekeeping operation is undertaken without US support, and that has been true since the UN was founded. Another is that the UN is a plot of the Democrats. Well, that's absurd. If any of you, no one here is old enough, but going back to 1945, we should remember, or we should look at our history and recall that Harry Truman made a tremendous effort to make it a fully bipartisan issue. There was a senator from my home state, from Michigan, named Arthur Vandenberg, and a senator from Texas named Connolly. And those two, Republican and Democratic, traveled the country to make sure that both sides, both parties, understood how this was in our national interest, that foreign policy was a bipartisan issue. Do you remember the phrase that partisanship stopped at our borders? And that for the good of our country, when we think of US and the world, we should be thinking as one country. We need friends from both parties. We need supporters. We need enlightened thinkers from both parties. And that bipartisanship, well, I hope it comes back again. Another, and this is a timely question and criticism, is that the UN, quote, failed in Iraq. Well, let me suggest that what failed in Iraq, and now I'm taking us back to the time we went to war, about a year ago, what failed was the U.S. argument in the Security Council. The U.S. did not win that debate. That is to say, the U.S. was not able to persuade 9 out of 15 members of the Security Council that we were under threat of imminent attack, that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and that circumstance required preemptive strike. That's the reality. I was there listening every hour to that debate. In fact, the Security Council fulfilled its role, which was to provide a forum for a very intense debate on an issue where people were deeply divided. And much of the world, including many of our best friends and allies, were not persuaded. And so the U.S. left, went outside, formed a sort of coalition on its own, and proceeded. But, have you noticed, now the U.S. has come back to the UN very respectfully and said, please won't you join us in the rehabilitation of Iraq? Please won't you bring your expertise in reconstruction, in forming of new and free elections, in training of civil police, in setting up safe birth clinics, because the health system is just about shattered. All things where UN has this long experience. And now, nobody says it, but you have to know that other countries have memories, right? They remember. In New York, do they have this word out here, DIST? They remembered that the rest of the world was in some sense dissed or disrespected, and U.S. didn't have the patience or the perseverance or the ability to win that argument. I believe if they had stayed the course, they might have. And then it would have been a very different experience. Nonetheless, let me add that that is past, and that countries have now acknowledged what's done is done. It is important to come together, and that rift is little by little being healed. Another myth, and I'll try to move quickly, is that U.S. soldiers, U.S. American soldiers, carry an undue burden in UN peacekeeping. That is utterly false. There have never in UN operations been more than 3% of American soldiers at any given time, and right now it's about 1%. The Canadians, the Dutch, the Pakistanis, the Brits, the Argentines all contribute more than the Americans. As you know, that's a very contentious domestic issue, but I do want to add the U.S. has helped in other important ways with technical support, logistics, communications, air transport, and that is important too. Another is the charge, the myth about Americans will never serve under foreign command. Well, that's not true. We've served under foreign command since our own Revolutionary War, when Americans served under French General Lafayette, and again in World War II under the Field Marshal Montgomery, and in many other wars, too many to list here, where we have served under other commanders. The operational control would be under a foreign commander in that given situation, but the ultimate command is always from your own commander-in-chief, the President of the United States. UN soldiers wear UN peacekeepers wear their national uniforms, that is an American uniform, but with the blue insignia or the blue helmet or beret to identify that they're part of the team. Another is this charge that the UN is trying to form a world government. Have you heard that one? Well, it's impossible. The UN is an association of governments. It is an instrument of governments. It has no independent power. It has no endowment or trust fund. It has no power to tax or to borrow money. It has only the means and mandates given to it by member states. Another is that UN is a threat to our sovereignty. That's a favorite one from the far right. Let me suggest that the UN is an exercise in sovereignty. It is an enhancement of a country's sovereignty, and it is the recognition of the sovereign status of other nation states as well. Well, so it goes. These myths are... I could laugh at them, I could dismiss them, but I think it's important for people who care about UN to come back and to answer these critics, because otherwise this nonsense stands out there as if it's truth, and it is not. So I ask you to lend your voices when you hear such comments. A final one, that the UN is, quote, irrelevant. That was popular for a month or so last year. Let me say, the UN is an imperfect institution, as mankind is, but it is indispensable. That's the I word I would use. It is a reflection of the flaws and shortcomings of mankind. It is a reflection of the lack of political will from member states, and yet it is a universal forum like no other, where the U.S. has every opportunity to win and persuade and win the debate, to set the standard, to serve as a role model. I do know that the UN needs the U.S. If U.S. is fully engaged, fully committed, success is much more assured. But I do think also that the U.S. needs the UN. Remember Ambassador Albright's comment that even superpowers need friends. It is not true that the UN is anti-US. There is a longing for American leadership. But sometimes we send confused signals. Do we want UN to succeed or to fail? And when we come up with what we call US exceptionalism, that is saying all of you but not us, it creates a problem. Do you remember the unpaid dues? For 12 years, US didn't pay its dues. Do you remember that the Americans have promoted peace and promoted democracy, but many times supported dictators? Remember our friend, the Shah of Iran? Do you remember Mobutu, the president of Zaire, and President Marcos of the Philippines? And do you recall that Saddam Hussein was once our man in Iraq? Do you know that last year that the U.S. canceled its entire voluntary contribution to the UN Population Fund? It zeroed it out. It was $34 million, and from the first day of the founding of the Population Fund, the U.S. has always been there. I would first say that $34 million to UN is real money. But I would also say that it goes beyond the money. It has a symbolic value, saying once again, we'll go our way. You do without us. And do you recall that the U.S. has repudiated the International Criminal Court? At the end of the Clinton administration, he signed it. It was one of his last acts in office. But then the Bush administration repudiated that. He, quote, unsigned it, but not only that, the U.S. is now punishing other member states who have chosen, for their reasons, to sign on to the International Criminal Court. It does seem to other states that sometimes our principles and our practice don't match. When the U.S. acts in this way, in a unilateral way, when exceptionalism, to use that word, just applies to us, it makes things very difficult. And people do remember. Well, this is the source of a great debate that is going on in Washington and that I hope is going on out here. I am not here for any political reasons, but I do always look at the votes of any state, of the Washington representatives of any state that I'm going to. And it's fascinating to me that here in Iowa, you have a clean split. One senator is supporting UN, another is against. And among your 5 congressmen, it cuts almost down the middle. So without saying any names, I would just encourage you. First, for those who are friends of UN, if you agree, if you understand the point I'm trying to make, give them a little encouragement. It's not easy sometimes, and it would mean a great deal for them to know that you care, that you support UN, and that you vote, and you're in their home state. And for those who are anti-UN, who are bashing UN, who are complaining or misunderstanding UN, or talking about some of these ridiculous myths and misperceptions, with respect, correct them. And again, let them know that you care and that you're an Iowan and you vote. Well, the last thing I would say on this matter of principles and practice is a quick litany. There is one other area where we make it difficult for the rest of the world to be friends. I made passing reference to the International Criminal Court, but there are about 7 important global treaties where the U.S. had a key role in drafting them, not just over weeks, but over years. But when it came time, when the finished product was there, when everybody had put their best effort into it, the U.S. chose not to sign, not to ratify. One is the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. One is the Convention on the Rights of Children. Imagine that. One is the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. One is the Kyoto Treaty on Climate Change, on the environment. One is the Convention for Economic and Social Rights. One, can you imagine this, is the Convention to ban landmines. And then there's the International Criminal Court. Finally, we did sign the Convention Against Genocide, but it took us 35 years to do it. Well, what can you say to the rest of the world? US will always be heard. We are the 800-pound gorilla. We have a huge US mission or embassy to the United Nations. We have experienced diplomats in every committee. When the U.S. speaks, people listen. But when we give mixed messages, when our policies and our practice don't match, then it is very hard for others, even our best friends and allies, to stick with us. If we can find a way to be more coherent, to be more honest, to be more humble, if I may use that word, to be more respectful, we will find over time that we accomplish much more. Because we are so powerful, intellectual power, economic power, military power, economic power, we don't need to threaten. We can use what has been described as soft power, especially the power of persuasion and the power of example. That, I would suggest, is an enormous opportunity to make a better world. Well, for you who understand this, and I think you probably wouldn't have come unless you did, I would simply say that we need help on this. We need more voices. We need you to speak to your colleagues and your family and your children. We need leadership from Washington, certainly, members of Congress and the President, because only the President has the voice that can put it in the national context and can make the case for why the global interest and the national interest are joined in that way. But we need an American civilian population that understands this, that regains its sense of being a compassionate nation, that sees that not as a burden, but as an opportunity to lead and to make a better world. Sometimes we succeed, and when we do, we keep faith with the founders, who out of the ashes of World War II and the millions upon millions of deaths from that terrible war came together from the right and from the left, convinced that they could do just that if they would join forces. And I guarantee you, when political will and the necessary resources, both human and financial, come behind to back that up, anything is possible. Even a world where peace and justice and health and hope and opportunity prevail. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm counting on our presenter, Erica, to keep an eye on the time, but if time allows, I would welcome your questions or your comments on this or any aspect of this that you might like to explore. Yes, sir.
The work of the United Nations cannot be underestimated.
I'm sorry, would you like to try using the microphone? Is that on? Yeah.
The work of the United Nations cannot be underestimated or ignored. It's a very important institution. You mentioned that the present Secretary General has introduced substantial reforms,
Yeah.
but there are substantial reforms in need of being done. As far as I'm concerned, and that is just one person's opinion, countries like Japan, Indonesia, India, Germany, and Brazil are just as deserving to be on the Security Council as the 5 that are there. Now this is a structural need. The second thing is often countries disrespect UN with impunity without listening, as if United Nations work didn't take place and resolutions are totally ignored. Example has been long and persistent on the part of the Israelis and Americans more so than others. The third thing is United Nations has never tried to put an economic base under the UN itself. To me, it would be important if anybody that uses the oceans paid something to the United Nations, because that is, nobody really owns the ocean, so we might as well give it to all of us. a continent like Antarctica with substantial minerals, everybody lays claim to it because I think this place is close to mine. Why don't we give that to the United Nations? If anything comes out of that, then spend it on the population of the world for the good causes that the United Nations represents and espouses to peace, security, and all those things.
Right.
Now, why doesn't UN go along this kind of a thing? I suppose if everybody kept 20 miles of the coastal area of their waters, beyond that given to the United Nations, anybody that flies through that area pays something, anybody who uses the oceans for transportation pays something for it, and divide these things along those lines.
That's an interesting suggestion. Let me take those in sequence. First, to the question on Security Council. You're quite right. Security Council, those 15 members, in a way, it's an anomaly. It reflects the world in 1945. And nearly everybody you asked will agree that the Security Council should be reformed. What they mean is enlarged to more accurately reflect the world today. Everyone agrees on that point. The question is who should be on that larger Security Council? And should there be permanent members, or should there be permanent members with power of veto? And what would the criteria for those new members be? Would it be wealth? Would it be military power? Would it be geographic landmass? Would it be population? Or some other matter? That's where the sticking point happens. And then it bumps into real